Good afternoon and welcome to the MUZEO's online writing workshop. I'm Carol Latham, the Community Outreach Coordinator for the MUZEO Museum and Cultural Center in Anaheim. And it is our wish that you, your family, and circle of concern are all safe and healthy, not only now, but going forward as well. The MUZEO is a cultural and community hub with its mission to engage the community in exploring and celebrating our diverse heritage, culture, and the arts. And we do this through creative educational programming such as this, events and exhibits. We certainly appreciate your taking the time on a Sunday afternoon to join us. And this afternoon's presentation is with Lynette M. Smith. And I'm sure you'll have questions as we go through the presentation, so be sure to write them in the chat and we'll do our best to have all of them answered before the session ends. Let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Lynette is the owner and she operates All My Best, a copy editing and publishing service that serves book authors and publishers. She holds memberships in Publishers and Writers of San Diego, Publishers and Writers of Orange County, San Diego Professional Editors Network, and Editorial Freelancers Association. She's also the author of How to Write Heartfelt Letters to Treasure for Special Occasions and Occasions Made Special. These are available at major online retailers, and her letter writing website is goodwaystowrite.com. Personally and professionally, Lynette abides by 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. And always do your best. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Lynette Smith, who believes that together we can change the world one heartfelt letter at a time. Lynette?
Thank you, Carol. It's so nice to be here today and with all of you as well. I am so glad you've had the interest to attend and to want to put your heartfelt gratitude in writing for someone special. Now, most of you will be doing this for a marriage-related occasion coming up, but most of the advice I'll be giving will also relate to other situations. Now, we're going to have a little extra emphasis on unusual challenges that a marriage or a relationship may have to get started. And we'll talk more about that later. But I'd like to tell you, first of all, what inspired me to begin this emphasis on putting your gratitude in writing. Back in 2008, my son and daughter-in-law were at the wedding rehearsal dinner, and they each brought out a framed letter that they presented to their parents. And this letter talked about what it was like growing up in the family, what were the traits they most admired about each of their parents, and what values they had learned that they planned to bring to their marriage. They had their best man and maid of honor read those letters, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And certainly I was no exception. It was so moving to have this acknowledgement that we had brought him up well and that he was planning to start his road to married life with the right values behind him, and the fact that he was thanking us for those. And then his wife, Rachel, was doing the same thing for her parents. It was amazing. And so it inspired me over the years, and eventually I did write this book. It shows you how to write 157 different types of letters of appreciation. So this is how to write heartfelt letters to treasure for special occasions and occasions made special. And along the way, I realized that to get people to show their gratitude in writing was going to help me change the world by having people write their gratitude letters. So one letter at a time, it could change the world. I'd like to mention to you, if you haven't already either printed out or looked at the handout packet that you were provided, that the second and third pages of that packet are going to be useful, especially useful to have printed out for yourself if that's something you want to be doing as you go along out of that PDF packet. The second page is the one where you can take notes on the basics of writing a letter in different categories. And the third page is where you can customize information for the letter you're about to write by making some notes on that. I'd like to talk to you about the differences that can cause challenges in a marriage, commencing a marriage. Imagine, for example, a marriage that involves overcoming or addressing disabilities, where one or both of the husband and wife they have a disability. What comes to mind is if the man has been in the military and he's become disabled and they were planning to get married and he got out of the service a little early with this disability and they're about to get married, and she may need to step up to the plate in terms of helping with that disability in the marriage. And that's something they may not have planned initially, but it's something they're going to deal with and they'll be challenged to deal with that. A marriage might consist of a bride or a groom from two different religions or faiths or belief systems. I'm so sorry. And there may even be one person in the couple who is an atheist or an agnostic, and the other one may be deeply religious. And that can be a challenge. You know, each of them comes from an upbringing that's radically different, and they've got to find ways to not only work with each other in the marriage on that, but also deal with their respective parents and the religious occasions and different things like that, and find ways to cope with those. There can also be a marriage or a commitment between people of two non-traditional genders. You know, same sex, transgender, whatever. It's a changing world we're in, and a lot more of those types of marriages are happening in commitment ceremonies. And another challenge could be people of two different races, where each race comes with a strong cultural background of its own. Maybe there's an envisioned post-marital change in traditional roles. I mean, in the olden days, the men were the breadwinners and the women were the housewives. We're talking about the 40s, the 50s, and before that. More recently, there have been two income households tends to be the norm. Well, what if there's a situation where the man ends up being the house husband and the woman ends up having a really good paying job. And so their roles that would otherwise have been more traditional have been reversed. Now, are there any other examples that you can think of that you'd like to mention in the chat? Examples of challenges? What I would like is when we're talking about writing these letters, maybe you're a parent who's writing to a son or daughter getting married. Maybe you're a bride or a groom who is writing to your parents, or to, the bride is writing to the groom, or the groom is writing to the bride. So in each case, when you're addressing these challenges, there's a little different slant to what it is you want to say. But here is something that I think is the overriding message, no matter what type of letter you're wanting to write. To convey in that letter to be tolerant and thoughtful about what you may not fully understand. To honor the person's choices or the couple's choices. To avoid judging, and to express confidence that the person you're writing to or the couple is going to be able to meet these challenges and do so very well. Those, I think, are the very most important things to keep in mind for your letter. I'd like to talk about being you don't remember the good old days. Most of you don't. People used to write letters and save them, and you'd find maybe up in the attic or in a hope chest a bundle of love letters with a little ribbon tied around them or something like that. People aren't writing letters today for the most part. What are they doing instead? They're saying thanks, or they're tweeting thanks, or they're texting thanks, or they're emailing thanks. Nothing really makes it to a piece of paper, it seems like. And as such, a year from now, if someone has said thank you for something really special you did, no one's going to remember. You're not going to remember it. You're going to say something vaguely, oh, they were grateful. But if you had been given a letter that really talked about their gratitude and what it was about you that was special, that made this experience really, really wonderful, and you had that letter, every time you read it, you can feel just as good, just as appreciated as the first time. And I can tell you, with that letter that our son wrote, my husband and me, we've got it in a place of honor in our home. And every time I read it, my eyes well up, my hand goes to my heart. And this was 12 years ago. This is called staying power. And someday I'll be dead. My husband will be dead. My son will probably take that letter back and he will give it to his daughters, and they will save it. And this will be a way that they'll know what their grandma was like when she was alive, what their daddy thought was special about their grandma and their grandpa. And their children would know, and so on and so on. So it becomes a family heirloom and part of family history in a way. So that's really important. So it's saved, it's remembered, it's treasured, just like the relationship. So your letter that you're going to write today or begin today can help bring meaning and impart confidence in a relationship that may be challenged to bridge any differences. So your time investments you're going to put into this is a little while, but you know what? It's going to be worth it because that person or that couple is worth it. And this is going to it can be a life-changing letter for them. And I will show you how today. What you'll get during this workshop is how to plan and write the letter and considerations for packaging and presenting it. I'll be able to offer you individual guidance for your letter and a solid start on your first draft. And let's talk about that guidance, questions and answers. We're going to be dedicating about 15 minutes to writing, getting a start on your first draft later on. And just before that writing period, we'll have questions You can put your questions in the chat box anytime between now and then. And at that time, just before the writing period, Carol will let me know, and Berkenda may let me know what those questions are, and I can answer them then. If, by the way, you have a private question, it's too personal and you don't want it broadcast in the chat box or broadcast aloud, please, during the 15-minute writing period, address it just to me in the chat box, and I will do my best to answer you privately in the chat box. That the answer will go only to you during that time. So let's now get out the how to write a heartfelt letter handout if you have it, or else get ready to take notes regarding what's on there. Write down who you appreciate, who it is you're planning to write to. And let's talk about the general components of a letter of appreciation. You can start that letter most effectively by citing some kind of a memory, a shared treasured memory that you and your recipient has had. And then segue into the qualities that you most appreciate about the individual or individuals that you're writing to. And if it's your parents, for example, talk about your mother's traits that you admire, and then in another paragraph, talk about your father's traits that you admire. And after that, talk about what values you most admire that you may have acquired in your own life, and talk about the difference that these individuals or this individual has made in your life, and express confidence that this person or this couple is going to be able to meet life's challenges head on in a loving way towards each other and towards the people around them. The process of writing this letter is to plan it, write it, package it, present it, and possibly enhance the experience. And I'm going to tell you just a few things about each of those. In terms of planning the letter, you need to determine what length of a letter you'll write, especially, for example, if you're going to frame it, you have limited space. So you might even want to shop for the frame, for the mat board, if there's going to be one that will be in the frame, so you know how much space remains to write. And also, if you're going to write that letter and frame it, it makes the most sense to do it on the computer and just do your space planning so it fits the mat and the frame nicely. Also, if you're going to print a letter on the computer, use permanent toner, not water-based ink, because if the letter is going to end up in any kind of a humid environment, that ink won't do well. But suppose all you have is a color inkjet printer. Go ahead and print the letter on plain paper using that printer, and then go over to your local FedEx office or UPS store and have them copy it, color copy using a laser process onto nice stationery. They often have a nice selection of stationery that people use for resumes and things like that. So they can photocopy it onto one of those. And then that will become your original that you'll sign by hand, by the way. It's about the only part that isn't done on the computer is your signature. So this would be a way to get that done. Now, on the other hand, if you're just writing the letter by hand, you don't have space limitations. You can take as many pages as you want. And you can, if you're really trying to do something special, if you're comfortable using a fountain pen, that can make the lettering really beautiful. Oh, handwriting versus hand printing. A lot of people don't handwrite anymore, and it may indeed be that over time, someday cursive writing will become some kind of a secret code, and people may be confused by it. So that's a factor too. If you're going to handwrite a letter, you have to decide whether you want to use cursive writing or printing. So keep that in mind as well. So that's all about the planning process. The writing process, you want to be in a quiet environment and dedicate quality time to doing the writing so that you don't have distractions if you can. As far as your style of writing, write naturally. Make it flow logically, but it's as if you're speaking to somebody. Don't get hung up in all your words and get just like that, knotted up in a knot, trying to get your words out. Instead, pretend the person you're writing to is just sitting across the table from you and you're talking. Write the words down as if you're speaking to that person. You'll be able to refine them later. They don't have to be perfect the first time, but it at least will seem natural. You'll have a natural flow to that letter. You could establish a theme for your letter. My son, as a matter of fact, did the theme of journey, growth. You know, he did journey. He talked about the road trips we used to take. And then he wrapped up later on, alluding to how he was going to go forward with his wife, Rachel, riding shotgun. And so that was, he was journey with road trips. And so he had a theme going with that. Your theme, if you want to establish one, might be growth or enrichment. The other thing you want to remember in your letter is to be positive, loving, and truthful. And let's talk about truthful. This is not the place to bring up anything negative whatsoever. Don't say, I like everything about you except. This is not the place. This is a gratitude letter and a letter of support for the future. So truthful, but positive and loving. Once you've got your first draft, rewrite it to your heart's content until you're happy with the contents. And I might suggest, once you're happy with the contents, to run it by somebody you trust who has a good command of English and grammar, who can look at it and not tear it apart, but just help you correct any mistakes that might otherwise be embarrassing. All right, so now you've got your letter in its final form, and you may frame it. You may fold it up and put it in an envelope. You may put it in a certificate holder and put it in a large envelope. You may place it in a pocket folder. All of these are possibilities. So it kind of depends on how you're planning to present the letter as to the way in which you want to use it. And of course, you're not going to frame the letter if you don't think they're going to put it on the wall. So don't be too presumptuous with this framing thing. I want to caution you though, going back to laser images and folding things, if you're not already aware, toner, color or black and white toner, if that's used on a letter and then you print it and that letter goes through the mail, especially if it was folded, you get ghost images on any surface that toner surface touches. So what this means, let's suppose you're folding your letter in thirds. Fold it so the writing is to the outside, and that way you won't have any ghosting images showing on your letter itself. Now, what if you're writing to your parents, and let's say it's separate letters, or if parents are writing to their adult child and the person that child's going to marry. You want to treat them each uniformly. And I'm going to allude again to what our son and daughter-in-law did. They each wrote a letter to their respective parents. If only one of them had written a letter and the other one had not written a letter, that would have looked really bad. It would have made the parents who didn't receive a letter feel bad. So you want uniform treatment. If you're doing anything like this type of a gesture, you want it to be equal. And since we're talking about marriages, what about how you're going to present that letter? As I mentioned at the wedding rehearsal dinner, our son and daughter-in-law chose to have their best man and maid of honor read them aloud while they stood beside their own parents. And that went over very well. And it also was good because if they had broken down and cried, they might have had difficulty reading the letter. So that was one good way. Some people might consider presenting these types of letters at the wedding reception. Again, equal treatment. If the son is giving a letter to his parents, the daughter should be giving a letter to hers, and they should both be done there. Or if the letters are framed, they can perhaps be displayed at the wedding reception somewhere. That's another option. Now let's talk about enhancing the experience. You have a letter, and that's fine. It might also be nice if you had a video recording of how of reading the letter. If I were writing a letter to my son before he was getting married, I might make a video where I'm reading that letter aloud to him, and he would have that for the future as well as the letter itself. Maybe just an audio recording. Another thing that can come into play is, suppose you're writing to someone in the military and they're overseas, and you can send a letter, but you might also be able to send it, even just an audio recording or a video recording, depending on the means they have to read these things. So that's the last part of it, is enhancing the letter. You'll find when you're writing these letters that it's a truly rewarding experience for both the giver and the receiver. It feels good to give. You've experienced that sensation before. It feels good to give. It feels good to write. It feels good to share gratitude. And it feels good to be appreciated. So it's a two-way street. You may find this becomes a habit. When you write this one letter, you're going to go, that was really cool. You know what? I always wanted to write to my 6th grade teacher because she really inspired me to do something. Let me track her down and write. So that you'll find other occasions where you want to express your gratitude to people. Oh, I talked about enhancing the experience. I wanted to show you how words, yeah, absolutely. Sorry. In the book that I wrote, I have word lists. And this really can help you get going. See, I've got 15 lists in there of 72 words each to describe different people, like a teen girl or a younger man, for example. And looking at a list of words like that can help you know what admirable qualities to write about. So I've given some thought to this theme of loved ones bridging any differences. And I've come up with 100 words that I'm going to read to you slowly by different themes. So you can jot down the words that you think, that's going to apply. Let me remember to use that word later on. So in the theme of creativity, Think of the person you're writing to, and then if any of these words apply, jot them down. Able, adept, capable, handy, versatile, adaptable, analytical, clever, inventive, insightful, astute, intelligent, purposeful, collaborative, creative, imaginative, innovative, efficient, organized, level-headed, practical, systematic. Now, if we want to talk about attitude, here comes some more words. Ambitious, brave, confident, independent, attentive, conscientious, perceptive, authentic, genuine, honest, reasonable, broad-minded, fair-minded, principled, courteous, diplomatic, easygoing, non-judgmental, tactful, unbiased, likable, pleasant, positive, warm-hearted, communicative, motivational, energetic, enthusiastic, flexible, mature, realistic, responsible, sensible, forgiving, generous, giving, guiding, inspiring, patient, sensitive. Now, on the theme of loyalty and supportiveness, here comes some more words. Advocating, persistent, protective, resilient, resolute, strong, unfailing, comforting, compassionate, reassuring, companionable, respectful, supportive, courageous, dauntless, determined, proud, devoted, loving, nurturing, empathetic, encouraging, thoughtful, understanding, faithful, loyal, reliable, true, objective, tolerant, truthful. And in the theme of cooperation, considerate, cooperative, hardworking, helpful, observant, open-minded, and trusting. So there you go. You've just heard 100 words, that some of which might apply to your letter. So I hope you've written down the ones that you have in mind, and of course, feel free to add your own that apply to that letter. And this is the time to invite questions before we start writing.
There are a couple of questions that have come up. Number one, and this refers to the original group of questioning when you're talking about the different types of commitments and partnerships, is where one person in the couple is incarcerated, maybe how that could be addressed. And then another one just came up. If one person in the couple strongly objects to writing a letter to their parents, do you recommend that they not honor just one set of parents at the public ceremony? How do you feel about writing and giving a letter to the lucky set of parents at another time privately?
I think publicly, you should not present letters to just one couple, one set of parents. This should end up being a private matter for the one person who does want to write a letter to their parents. Just keep it between them and don't make it public at all. As regards the incarceration, there are obviously challenges because one is incarcerated, the other is not. Probably the parents of the person who is not incarcerated will have some angst over the situation. The parents of the person who is incarcerated will be pleased that the prisoner is going to be coming into a stable relationship, but obviously there are large challenges in that relationship. Visitation is going to be difficult, and so I think I would recommend jotting down the challenges that you envision coming to mind. Now, I'm not sure who's writing this letter. Is this one of the couple who's writing to the other person, or is this parents writing to the children?
That's not clear. It just said another challenging marital relationship.
Sure.
And I think from the way in which it's phrased, it probably is one of the couple writing to the other who's incarcerated. That's my take on it.
And that type of a letter would be more intimate about the ways in which the couple's relationship is going to be directly affected. And I think that would be a case where you'd want to talk about, yes, I know we have these challenges, it's hard to get together, but here's what we'll do instead. And here's what I see going forward. And you're going to be out, in 3 years, and we have plenty of life ahead of us at that time to make a beautiful life together. And in the meanwhile, we're going to, approach this as bravely as we can and with as much positivity as we can. And I know we'll weather this together in the best way possible. So thoughts to that effect would be good to express. Were there any other questions to start with?
Those were the only two.
Okay, well, I'd like to draw your attention to the third, third page handout, my letter to. And this is the time now to start filling that in. And when you've got that filled in, the first sections where there are blanks, then it's time to go ahead and start writing your draft. And for that, we're going to allow about 15 minutes. So it's about 20 till right now. So at about 5 minutes till 3, we'll break. And during this time, remember, if you have any highly personal questions you want to ask to me, then in the chat box where it says to everyone, there's a pull down arrow that mentions other people. Just go down to my name and click that, and I'll be the only one seeing that question. And then when I respond to you in the chat box, I'll address it only to you. So you'll have a level of privacy in that regard. In the meanwhile, anyone who has questions that they don't mind, over this 15-minute period, that they don't mind having made public at the end of the writing time, go ahead and just post those to everyone and in the chat box. And then Carol will let me know about those when we're finished writing. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to be very silent, but I'll be watching the chat box for questions that are addressed to me alone. Thank you.
There's a statement here. I think couples who live apart due to career obligations can strengthen their relationships by writing real letters occasionally rather than settling for text messages, emails, etc.
I like that. Good idea.
So you advise that rather than trying to write something that is epic, that you just start with writing something.
Yes. Just pretend you're sitting across the table from the
Mm-hmm.
person you're writing to, and let your thoughts pour out as speech, and the speech becomes writing.
important is it that in the writing, if you are not an experienced writer, that you have all of the proper grammar and proper spelling and those kinds of guidelines? When there is someone who just wants to write and express themselves to whomever without feeling that they have to be perfect.
First of all, there's no such thing as perfection. You can strive for excellence. I think in your letter, strive for authenticity first and foremost, and then get the help of somebody you know who can spot misspellings and errors in punctuation and who is not going to try to rewrite your letter. Your letter still needs to be authentic.
We have a question from Victoria.
Excuse me, do we want to interrupt the quiet time with the questions or wait until after?
Well, may we take this last one and then we'll be quiet?
Okay.
Are there any tips for working on penmanship? I think my letter will be much more enjoyable and easier to read if it is written neatly.
Well, first of all, I know when I'm handwriting a letter, if I'm in a hurry, it looks ugly. If I slow down, it looks a lot better. But if your penmanship is, even when you slow down, if you have to admit that someone else may have difficulty reading it, what about if you print the letter, hand print it, and if you still find that to be a problem, then go ahead and put it on the computer and print it out. Use a nice font, you know, the computer has lots of choices.
Okay, thank you. We'll be quiet now.
Thank you. Okay, I think it's time now if we want to go ahead and see what questions Carol has found that I should answer.
Okay. Um, we had a comment that I wanted to address, as well as a couple of comments, as well as a question. And I think I'll do the question first. Flora wanted to know how, if you could explain in a little bit more detail what you mean by enhancing the letter.
Well, sometimes the occasion around which you present it can be an enhancement. Let's suppose, and we're not talking marriage here, we're talking about just, let's say you're writing to a dear friend and you're going to present it over lunch and you're going to read it aloud. Reading it aloud is one enhancement in itself. And if you, the framing is an enhancement of sorts, but I think we're talking about multimedia ways of delivering this letter. So the audio recording, a video recording of somebody writing that letter, but there are also other things. Let me show these. Those word lists that I mentioned that are in the book, there's a lot of things you can do with them. This is something I did for my father-in-law once. I picked all the words that I felt described him well and said, who says you're indescribable or something? And made a nice colorful little thing that I could then put in a frame or just give him. And then another time, these words were my son and daughter-in-law, I had them make a note of the words they felt best described the other. And then I made these little plaques out of them for them. And at another time, for their two daughters, as an experience with their baby showers, we were talking about wishes for Kaylin and wishes for Kinsley, the qualities that we hoped this new baby would have. And we made similar little plaques using those words. So these are ways to enhance the experience too. I mean, suppose you're writing a letter right now to a your fiance, and you want to give them a letter, but when you were looking at all those possible words, you found a lot of words. So you could make a little plaque to go with it, or something like that will help you use those words. Does that clear up what you're wondering, Flora?
I'll see what her response to that is. We had a comment about, we have a couple of young letter writers on the panel, not on the panel, on the screen, who are participating, and the wedding and marriage thing didn't work so well for them. So what they're choosing to do is to write letters to their moms.
Perfect.
And
what's coming up in a week?
Using the same information that you have shared to enhance that experience.
And
yes.
Mother's Day is in a week. It's a perfect, the theme for today was the marriage, but heavens, writing a letter to mom for Mother's Day and another one to dad for Father's Day is a great idea. And once again, start with a treasured shared memory that you remember, that you both experience, and then talk about mom's or dad's most positive traits that you just really admire. And then talk about what it is that you want to emulate someday, and that you try to emulate right now that you've learned from them. Whether it's cooking, whether it's always treating people right, whatever, values, skills, talk about, oh my goodness, okay. The kinds of things that they make a positive difference in your life is the bottom line. That's how you want to close out the letter, and then say thank you for who you are, and then sign it, love, your name. So that's perfect for Mother's Day, for Father's Day. Any of those?
There was a comment from Flora, and I think it goes to everyone, but maybe it might be another jumping off point to discuss. And she says, I treasure the letters, recipes, diary entries, and notes written in the not so perfect handwriting with spelling errors and all from my older relatives, especially now that they are deceased. The authentic way they wrote them are endearing and reflect the personality and lifestyle of the letter writer. I don't know if I'd appreciate them as much if they had been edited for proper grammar and spelling.
Quite right. Well, there's two different types of letters here. We're talking about a letter for a momentous occasion when we're talking about for a marriage. So I think it's all right to do your best with, the spelling and punctuation, but not rewrite the letter. No, don't let someone rewrite your letter for you. But for day-to-day communications and so forth, I remember when I was a kid, I had an aunt that I just dearly loved. I hardly ever got to see her because she was in Texas and I was in California. But I always had my Dear Aunt Tommy letters. And she would write back, Dear Lynette, and she had her authentic style as I had mine, and there was nobody editing our letters. They were still quite treasured letters at both ends of that. Our love for each other was really, really strong, and those letters made a really good bond between us.
So I think what I get out of that too is that there's a place for both types.
Yes.
And one shouldn't necessarily circumvent the other. It should just be something that is done in appreciation on some level or another.
Right. Now, here's an example. If somebody is writing a very private letter to a loved one, let's say that loved one is deceased and they're still writing a letter to give a sense of closure. You're not going to run that letter by anybody else, because no one else is intended to see it. You don't need the grammar and the punctuation and the spelling fixed by anybody. This is just between you and your departed loved one. So no, you don't need anyone else correcting that letter. But if this is going to be in any way a public or a publicly presented letter or a framed letter, those are the kinds of letters that really need to not have too many glaring errors in them. As a matter of fact, allow me to read something from my son's letter here. Your attention to detail is legendary. No doubt you will find several flaws within this letter. I'm a copy editor by profession, so so of course I told him that he got an A on the letter. Privately, there were 3 minor errors, but I forgive him and it's quite all right because he couldn't exactly have me go over his letter for him.
But just from a personal standpoint, I remember several years ago writing my mother a love letter, and it was everything that I wish I could say in person, but I wrote it. And years later, when she died and we were going through her things and sharing and getting rid of things, we came across this letter, and it really touched me because it was so worn. And it made me realize that she had read it many, many times since the day that I had sent it to her.
I was in communication with Larry Edwards, and he told me that he wrote a letter to his mother who was in a memory care facility with Alzheimer's. Sometimes he said she didn't even know who he was when he came to visit. But he wrote her a letter this time that talked about how sorry he was for giving her a hard time when he was growing up, and that he really, really, looking back, does appreciate everything she ever did for him.
Yeah.
And he read that aloud to her, and she kept the letter, and each day she would have somebody different read it aloud to her. She carried that letter the same way, and she would say to people, my son wrote me this. My son wrote me this. So, this meant a lot to her, and it meant a lot to him that he had found a way that he could connect with her.
Yeah.
So these letters have some amazing consequences sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
There's one other comment here from Flora. Flora, you've been such a participant. Thank you so much. She says, 1 year, my youngest daughter gave me a Father's Day card since my husband, her dad, had passed, and she wanted me to know that she appreciated me for carrying on both roles. That's really
Nice.
quite beautiful. Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. And I'm sure treasured.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing that you save and you treasure. It's wonderful. Well, if that's it on
Those are all the comments and questions that I have.
All right. Well, I would like to say to all of you, best wishes on completing and presenting your letters. If you encounter any additional questions or concerns or rough spots when you're finishing out writing your letters, and you want me to answer them privately, I will be happy to do that. Here's my email address: Lynette, Lynette, at goodwaystowrite, WRITE.com. So you can reach me there and I'll be happy to answer your questions for you. And if you like today's experience and you want to write more letters, I recommend strongly that you order my book, How to Write Heartfelt Letters to Treasure for Special Occasions and Occasions Made Special. You'll find it quite useful, and all those 15 demographic word lists at the back can open the door to doing all those fun projects too, as well as the letters. So that's a kind of a nice thing. The book also has more than just those lists. It has inspirational thoughts to quote in your letters. You can put a famous quote at the top or the bottom, and they're organized by theme, so you can find the right kind for the purpose. And there's another section in the appendix for great beginnings to jumpstart your sentences. And all of that is just in the back. In the chapters, you can focus on the type of letter you're writing, and there are some prompting questions there to help you give thought to what it is you want to say in those letters. So it is a very helpful, comprehensive book. I would like to also invite you to visit goodwaystowrite.com for more information on ordering that, or just connecting with me. My contact information is all there. And I'd like to tell you that I appreciate you and thank you. And if you've got gratitude, keep writing. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Lynette. And before you close, I just let you say that in the chat is Lynette's website, and you can also get additional information on the MUZEO website as well, www.museo.org. And there'll be a follow-up evaluation email as well. Do let us know your thoughts on this program as we are continuing to bring relevant programs to the community, especially during these very uncertain times. And there will also be a support the MUZEO button if you choose to, and it's on our website, email, Instagram, and as always, your generosity is greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank Berkenda Cantlow for her work behind the scenes, doing all the technical work to make this happen. Certainly thanking Lynette for this amazing afternoon of heartfelt writing. And of course, you, the audience, we appreciate
Thank you all
the time to be here this evening. And we just wish you to continue staying well, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you again.
And stay happy.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Lynette.